So one of the first things we learn when we get into this hobby is that in-house movements are God. An ETA, a Sellita, or something like something Valjoux 7750 based, that's, not worth it. It's in-house movement and nothing. But is that really the case? Hi everyone, and welcome to Valjoux. And yes, today we're talking about movements again, and in this case we're talking about ETA, Sellita, and 7750 based movements, which are essentially the most common outsourced movements that you can get, and taking a look at whether they're really worth it, whether some of the sort of stigma and bad rap that some of them get really has any substance to it. And of course, much like my video about in-house movements, I'm not actually going to give you the final answer. I'm going to give you the positives and the negatives of having an ETA, Sellita, or 7750 based movement, so you can make your own judgment on whether it matters to you. Because at the end of the day, like most debates in this topic, it's more a case of personal preference and priority versus a hard and fast answer. But enough exposition and disclaimers, let's get right into it and talk about the 3 positives and 3 negatives about an ETA, Sellita, or 7750 based movements. The first big advantage to having an outsourced movement like this is maintenance. In the 2000s and 2010s, there was a few years where you could get a Ferrari 360 Modena for about $40,000–$50,000 US. This was a car that cost, maybe what, 100, 120, 150,000 US when it was new. And so these all seemed like bargains, but the surprise many of the people got when they bought these was that, yeah, you could buy it for 30 or 40, but maintaining it would cost you 20 or 30 from time to time as well with an engine out service. Essentially, you got the discount on buying it, but the maintenance was brutal to the point you probably end up paying more to own it than you did to buy it. The big advantage with outsourced movements like ETAs and Sellitas, etc., is that you can have your cake and eat it too. With something like an Hublot Big Bang, that has a Valjoux 7750 based movement, and with that, you can buy a watch that new at retail costs around $13,000 US, but the maintenance isn't going to be that of a $13,000 watch. It'll be the same as it would be on Tag Heuer Caliber 16, IWC Pilot, or pretty much any other watch that uses that same movement. And that's a huge, huge advantage because it means that you can have that experience. You can save so much money on the pre-owned market without having to outlay in terms of the maintenance. In-house movements are expensive to service because only certain people can make them. Certain people know what parts to use. Certain people only have access to the parts to use. That all drives up your maintenance costs. It means it's more expensive to own your watch. Whereas with something that has an ETA base, a Sellita base, or a 7750 or something like that, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can buy a watch at a good pre-owned price and not have to pay an arm and a leg to be able to service it. The second positive is reliability. For a little bit of context, the ETA 2824 was released in 1972, the Valjoux 7750 in 1973, and the ETA 2892-A2 in 1980. So these watches have had anywhere from 40 to nearly 50 years of service life. That means that anything that could go wrong has already been engineered out. They still suffer from normal day-to-day wear and tear, but that's pretty much it. Faulty parts, poor engineering, testing, research and development, that was all done decades ago. That means that you can count on watches like this. It means that watchmakers can reliably tell you, hey, it's going to be XYZ amount of years until you need to service this again. It means they can service them to make sure they last that amount of time. It means that you can have the confidence of knowing that you have a movement that's been tried and tested decade upon decade. And that can provide a lot of peace of mind. Knowing exactly what you're in for from a mechanical standpoint can really help, especially if you're buying an older watch, for example. A lot of the times it can be a bit worrisome if you're buying a neo-vintage or even a proper vintage watch, if these are really early examples. With any of these, you know exactly what you're getting. It's very easy to find forums, reviews, personal experiences. There's so much documented evidence on what the experience with these movements is, and so many watchmakers that can work on them. It just makes that ownership experience a lot calmer. And then the last advantage is what may seem like the most obvious, which is cost. But I will point out a different spin to it when it comes to the lower cost, not just from us as the consumers, but it's a lower cost for the companies. And while you may think, oh, that just means they make more money, It also means it gives them the freedom to focus on their core competency. It gives them the freedom to focus on other priorities apart from the movement. When they get that outsourced movement, it means that's already done, that's already engineered. They can allocate their development budget to things like using different materials, like on the Big Bang, for example. When that was released in 2005, a multi-material watch like that, using ceramics, using titanium, that was still a costly endeavor. So it allowed them to push more of their budget towards that versus pushing it towards the movement. Something like the IWC Pilot. You end up getting that anti-magnetism that you might not have gotten if they'd have spent their money on an in-house movement. It allows it to be a better tool watch for the tool or for the theme that they've chosen, which is a pilot's watch. It allowed them to include those special gaskets that stop the glass from popping out upon descent. Those are all engineering costs that could have otherwise been taken up by the development cost of a movement. So there's definitely a lot of really tangible advantages and benefits to using a mass-produced outsourced movement that maybe a lot of people don't recognize. Usually they just look at just buying price and that's it. But there's a lot of other really good advantages that do make it quite worth it. But that being said, not everything is perfect and there's always two sides to every story. So let's talk about the negatives to some of these things. And the first one is the unwanted comparisons. On the screen now you're going to see three watches. A Tag Heuer caliber 16, which retails for about 4,000 US, an IWC Pilot, which retails for around 5,000, 6,000 US, and an Hublot Big Bang chronograph, which retails for around 13,000 US. Now, all of these mechanically are almost identical on the inside. How comfortable would you be being the person who paid retail for that Hublot? Hell, how happy would you be being that person who bought the IWC, paying maybe $2,000 more than the equivalent Tag Heuer? And then you have all the micro brands which will charge you around $2,000, $3,000 for a 7750 based watch. It goes on, but essentially it brings about a lot of unwanted down market comparisons, which means essentially the higher you go in price while still using an outsourced movement, it reduces your exclusivity. It also just makes you feel a bit uneasy. Are you really getting the value that you want? It's one thing when you're buying pre-owned and depreciation is set in, it can even the playing field a little bit, but at that retail point, it's a tough pill to swallow paying 8, 9, 10, 13 grand for a watch that you know has a movement that's featured in a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 watch. The second negative is design compromises. Let's face it, most of us pick their watches mostly by the look of them. It makes a huge, huge impact. But when you have an outsourced movement, especially one that's mass produced, you run two very big risks. The first one is that they have to design the watch around the movement. If it's a thick movement, you get a thick watch. The other one is they are sometimes limited in how they can set it up. This is especially prevalent with chronographs. Take a look at the IWC. Now take a look at the Tag Heuer. Seem familiar? That's because they both use exactly the same movement. That's why they have the same layout. That's why you look at them together and it just looks like they painted it differently. It takes away from the design freedom. There are too many compromises that have to be made sometimes when you don't have any control over the mechanical layout. And then the last problem, and that is innovation, or better said, lack thereof. Like I mentioned before, a lot of the most common movements were developed in the 70s and 80s. The last time these were cutting edge, a mustache like mine would have been found behind the wheel of a Ferrari or in an adult film. So that gives you a bit of an idea of how long it's been since anyone's actually bothered to make these movements any better. It shows you that at the end of the day, these are products of another era. In 2000, Rolex released the 4130 caliber, which had 70 hours of power reserved for a chronograph. In 2011, Omega released the caliber 9300, which would go on to evolve into the 9900, which has META certification and 15,000 Gauss of anti-magnetic resistance. And then in 2015, Hublot released the Unico, which not only is open worked on the front and has a flyback capability, it also features a modular escapement, which would drastically bring down maintenance cost as well as maintenance time. They can just switch out the escapement. It's already done and ready to go. And these are all things that you miss out on when you have one of these much older movements. They may be made brand new, but the technology is still old. Maybe reliable, but it's also not really pushing the envelope any further. But like most things in watches, this is going to come down to your personal preference. Which of these things matters the most and least to you to make you decide whether it's really worth it or not? I think buying price is a very important factor into a lot of these in terms of how much stock you put into some of these positives and negatives. The more money you spend, I think the more some of these negatives will come into play. But where that point is entirely subjective. In any case, I'd like to know in the comments below, what do you think of these? Do you think that in-house movements are better than ETA or outsourced ones, or vice versa? I'd love to know your opinions. And I'd love to know, in your opinion, what that price point is for when you should make the transition to an in-house movement. and why? And of course, if you like this video, make sure you like it and share it. Also in the description below, I've got full reviews of all the watches featured throughout this video if you want to learn more about them and their movements as well. And if you like seeing the pictures and infographics that I feature on my videos, then make sure you follow me on Instagram at Valjoux. And of course, if you want to see more videos about watches, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. In the next few weeks, I'm going to be doing some videos on some of the gray areas between full-on in-house and these mass-produced movements, so make sure you keep an eye out for those. And of course, thanks for watching this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.